Welcome back, everybody. For the past few months, most of the world has had its eyes fixated on the fight against the novel coronavirus.
Yeah, but attention is quickly shifting towards a different battle, one that's been around for much longer. That's the battle against racism. We've got the professor of York University Faculty of Education, Carl James, joining us this morning. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us and providing your insight ahead of time now. So let's get right into this now. Why is it so important to educate our younger generations about what is happening and the history of what has happened?
Because, of course, we're always preparing our young people for a world in which they will be responsible for what's going on around them. And they're responsible for creating these situations so that they can create situations that they can feel very comfortable with, safe. And I also think that we would want young people who live in an equitable society. And therefore, what happening around us should be things that they should be involved in and help to create.
How do we keep kids from getting discouraged?
I think we can think of the young people as people who are working with us rather than thinking that we have to be the only ones who will know what they want. They have also ideas about themselves. And therefore, if we engage them, I think young people, if they are people who we feel that they are going to work with us and also feel comfortable with what we're asking them to participate in, they might feel very engaged and not discouraged. And I think the more important thing is to always think of this is a partnership we're having with young people.
Carl, during these times, it's important to distinguish who's being targeted in these situations. So for you and myself, as a visible minority and as a black man, it's different experiences. Why is it important to separate those experiences between visible minorities?
Because we also think race is a reality. Racism, that reality. And therefore, race operates in our experience, in our interactions with each other. So we're going to have to admit race. We're going to also have to admit that different races have different relationships with the organization and with the structure, with the institution. We see racial groups differently, and they also have different histories within our society. So therefore, we're going to have to make those separations.
And racism could be overt, it could be covert, it could be subconscious. How do we address or get to know our own inherent biases in order to then fix them?
I think we have to get to know them, but we have to, first of all, admit racism exists. We also understand that this is not something, sometimes an individual matter. This is sometimes we're taught through the culture in which we live, the opportunities we have based on race. So we have, in knowing the understanding the culture, therefore we can understand how our biases and where our biases come from, where racism comes from. So I always want to think of racism more than just simply individual biases, but also it's informed by the structure in which we live, by the as people would say, as white supremacy has a particular kinds of implications for all our lives.
Professor, you've done so many studies, you've researched, you've talked to so many people throughout your career. We're hearing yesterday, and of course the news coming out to everybody today more so, the Premier says there's no systemic racism that he knows of in Canada. So how do you respond to that and to others that don't believe that exists in this country?
I think some of that has to do with the narratives we tell ourselves about who we are as Canadians. The narratives that we tell ourselves that, you know, there weren't racial differences, there weren't such thing as slavery in Canada. We tend not to remember the experiences of Indigenous people. And therefore, we have to start rethinking the narrative we have of Canada. We have to start thinking that narrative of Canada is very, very much part and informed by the Europeans coming and placing Indigenous people on reserves. We have to remember that slavery existed in Canada since the 1600s, and therefore, slavery existed in Canada for until the 1830s, and therefore all those kind of narratives we're going to have to learn. So therefore, the, the idea of black history must exist. We want that to exist as much as to give that education of how blacks and black history has been a reality in Canada for that long time. So I think it's a way to say, okay, we need to understand our Canadian history.
And we need to keep these conversations going in order to educate, because we are who we are surrounded by. And if perhaps you're in some, insulated area where you're not being taught any different or helped to learn anything different, we can rely on hopefully the education system to do that, right? For a paradigm shift, to build new foundational blocks to grow from.
We can rely on the education system to do that. We should rely on the education system to do that. The education system should be doing that. But at the same time, it's going to take whole society as well, beyond just the education system, because I might be learning about racism in my family. I can understand the structure of racism within my family. I can go to school and my teachers and everybody there might be giving me the education that they need to all that. But if the entire society, if the police, the justice system, if all those other systems are not also coming online, are also responding to that narrative of who we are as Canadians, if we're not getting those reinforcement of the possibilities of a black person, of a South Asian person, of the Indigenous person being able to become Chief Justice of Canada, then what I'm learning will be contradicted by the larger society. Therefore, it has to be a whole society effort. So the way that police responds to, for example, blacks or Indigenous people or South Asian, it's not simply just a matter of that police person, but also it's the police force, it's the institution, it's the culture that might be operating within the police force, and same thing with any other institutions. So we have to look at it not only on an individual level, but in terms of these institutions. Yeah. And we have to look at the larger society and how society communicate the information about possibilities from different racial groups.
Accountability and justice within the justice system.
So true. Professor Carl James, thank you so much. A wealth of knowledge. We appreciate you enlightening us this morning and sharing that with us. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much for having me. Have a very good day.
Thanks,
you as well. For more information, breakfasttelevision.ca. We'll be back with more BT right after this.